Before the world knew him as Dr. Death, before the televised trials and late-night debates, there was simply Jack Kevorkian, a man with a calm voice, a brilliant mind, and a belief so radical it would shake the foundations of modern medicine, that some people should be allowed to die by choice. Jack Kevorkian wasn't born into controversy. He was born into survival. The son of Armenian immigrants, Jack came into the world on May 26, 1928, in Pontiac, Michigan. His parents had fled the horrors of the Armenian genocide, and that legacy of suffering, of trauma, of living through unthinkable pain left a deep imprint on him. From the beginning, Kevorkian wasn't interested in the comfortable answers. He wanted to understand why we suffer, why we cling to life, and why death terrifies us. He was a prodigy, no doubt about it. By the time most kids were still learning multiplication, Jack was reading philosophy and classical literature. He entered college young and excelled in the sciences, eventually earning a medical degree from the University of Michigan in the early 1950s. But unlike most of his peers, Kevorkian didn't dream of curing disease. He wasn't chasing a miracle drug or a new surgical technique. He was drawn to the end, the final chapter, the last breath. And he wanted to know why we treated it like a failure instead of a moment of agency. Even in medical school, Jack asked the kinds of questions that made people uncomfortable. He studied death obsessively, its physical signs, its rituals, and most importantly, the ethical boundaries that surrounded it. In the 1960s, he made national headlines for proposing that condemned prisoners be allowed to volunteer their bodies for scientific experiments while still alive. He argued that if someone was going to die anyway, wouldn't it be more humane and more useful to let them contribute to medical research in their final moments? Most doctors were horrified. To many, he sounded more like a mad scientist than a physician. But Kevorkian didn't flinch. He believed the medical system was too focused on preserving life at all costs, even when life had become unbearable. His idea wasn't about playing God. It was about listening, truly listening to people in pain and giving them a voice in their own ending. Over the next 20 years, Jack Kevorkian faded from the headlines, but never stopped working. He published papers on euthanasia, on death, and on the failures of modern end-of-life care. He lived modestly, never married, and poured his energy into writing and research. But it wasn't until 1989 that his beliefs left the page and entered the real world, when he unveiled a device that would forever change how the public saw him. He called it the Mercitron, a machine built from spare parts, 4 tubes, a metal frame, and a few basic switches. It looked simple, almost crude, but its function was precise. The patient, fully alert and in control, would press a button. That button would release a series of chemicals. First a saline solution, then a barbiturate to induce sleep, and finally, potassium chloride to stop the heart. The doctor didn't inject the drugs, the patient did. Kevorkian believed this distinction was crucial. He wasn't killing anyone. He was offering the means to escape pain, to exit with dignity. At the time, physician-assisted suicide was illegal in all 50 states, but Kevorkian didn't hide his invention. He published his blueprints in medical journals. He appeared on talk shows. He dared the public to confront the issue. What rights do terminally ill patients have when hope is gone and suffering is all that remains? In 1990, Kevorkian found his first patient, Janet Adkins, a 54-year-old woman from Oregon who had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease. She was a mother, a wife, and a music teacher. Janet feared losing her memory, her autonomy, her identity. She reached out to Kevorkian not out of despair, but determination. She wanted to die while she still had control over her mind. Kevorkian agreed. The meeting took place in the back of his rusty Volkswagen van, parked in a Michigan campground. There, Janet pressed the button. Within minutes, she was gone. Peacefully, quietly, on her own terms. The backlash was immediate. Prosecutors opened a criminal investigation. Religious leaders called it murder. Medical associations labeled him a disgrace to the profession. But Jack didn't retreat. He welcomed the firestorm. In his mind, every reaction, every angry headline, every accusation, it all meant people were finally talking about death, really talking about it. He once said, "Dying is not a crime." And that statement, simple as it is, became the cornerstone of his mission. He wasn't trying to be liked. He was trying to force society to confront a truth it had buried under decades of platitudes and false hope, that sometimes the kindest act is to let someone go. By the time most Americans had even heard his name, Jack Kevorkian had already crossed the line from theorist to executioner, at least in the eyes of the law. But to others, he had become something else entirely, a last resort, a guardian of dignity, and for many suffering souls, a deliverer of peace. This was just the beginning. More patients would follow, more deaths, more outrage, and eventually, a courtroom battle that would define the debate for a generation. The question wasn't whether Jack Kevorkian was a killer. The question was whether he was the only doctor brave enough to answer the call when suffering had no cure. Then came 1998. Thomas Uke was a 52-year-old man with advanced Lou Gehrig's disease. He could no longer speak. He couldn't move his limbs. He wanted to die. Kevorkian agreed. But this time there was no machine, no patient-controlled button. Kevorkian administered the lethal injection himself, and this time he recorded it. He sent the footage to the producers of 60 Minutes. They aired it nationwide. Millions watched as Jack Kevorkian deliberately injected Thomas Uke with a fatal cocktail of drugs. This was no longer assisted suicide. It was euthanasia. Illegal, deliberate, undeniable. The state of Michigan finally had its case. Kevorkian was charged with second-degree murder and practicing medicine without a license. At the trial, he chose to represent himself. No lawyers, no filter, just Jack and a jury. He claimed it wasn't murder. He called it mercy. He said he did what no doctor had the courage to do. The jury deliberated for 2 days. The verdict: guilty. Kevorkian was sentenced to 10 to 25 years in prison. He served 8. In 2007, he was released on parole, weak and aging, but still defiant. He gave lectures, he did interviews, he even ran for Congress. But the fire in his body had begun to fade. On June 3, 2011, Dr. Jack Kevorkian died in a Michigan hospital. Natural causes. No machines, no buttons. Just a quiet end. In total, he claimed to have helped over 130 people die. To some, he was a murderer. To others, a hero. And to a handful of patients and their families, he was the only one who listened when no one else would. Love him or hate him, Jack Kevorkian forced America to face a question it still hasn't answered. Is the right to die as sacred as the right to live?